Welcome to episode 31 of the Hunt Backcountry podcast, presented by Exo Mountain Gear. In this episode, we have a returning guest. Russ Meyer joined us on episode 16, and now he's back on this one specifically to talk about spring bear hunting. It's that time of year, guys. We talked tonight about how to kill a bigger Bruin, or maybe catch your first Bruin if you're new to bear hunting. Russ is just an absolute animal when it comes to hunting. You might remember that episode 16 was simply entitled, The Most Successful Hunter I Know, and that's how Steve describes Russ. You guys are sure to enjoy this episode. If you have any interest in bear hunting, you're definitely going to learn something. Here we go, on to the episode with Russ Meyer.
The Hunt Backcountry podcast is proudly brought to you by Exo Mountain Gear, makers of ultralight, ultra-tough packs that are designed to do what you love most, hunt the backcountry. Exo packs are designed for efficiency, simplicity, and durability that's backed by a lifetime warranty. To learn more about Exo Mountain Gear, please visit www.exomountaingear.com.
Well, Russ, welcome back to the Hunt Backcountry podcast. We had you on a previous episode and excited to talk to you tonight about spring bear hunting. How are you, man?
I'm doing good.
Good.
Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, I saw that you were just out with Steve this morning, hitting the hills. Steve, what's up with the exo hike that you guys have been doing?
Oh, yeah, we just been doing it for a couple months now, pretty much every Thursday morning, right out of Boise. We have this place, Russ grew up right there, actually, and it's just called Table Rock, which is like an 850-foot climb, and just a good trail. It's, just meet there at 7 a.m., and this morning was cool. We had 10 guys do it with us, and put 50, 60 pounds in the pack and hike up there as fast as you can. It's a good way to start off Thursday morning.
Heck yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome. I live a little ways away, so the drive, it was worth the drive, though. I enjoy it. Like Steve said, I grew up over there, so every rock has a memory over there for me, so I just love it.
Yeah, that is pretty neat.
Russ I had all these stories about shooting his first rock chucks, with a old traditional bow. I was right over on that rock over there. It's pretty cool.
Speaking of shooting a trad bow, before we get on topic here, Russ, did I see a picture of you on Facebook the other day, laying down, practicing shooting from the ground?
Oh, yeah. We were at the archery fit. We always hang out at the archery fit afterward, and yeah, I was just showing how versatile traditional bows can be. Back in the day when I hunted and shot a lot of traditional, I mean, there's not really one position I didn't practice. And I always had a dream, 25-year dream of one day I'm going to shoot an animal off my back with my recurve. It hasn't happened, but I think I'm going to attempt it this bear season. We'll see.
Nice.
Get right down low, maybe 12, 15 yards and see if I can get away with it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's very cool. Very cool. All right, well, let's get on the topic of exactly that, of bears. So we'll cover quite a bit of ground today, but, we want to talk information that's helpful for beginner hunters, bear hunters, as well as some of the experienced guys, and kind of give some more maybe advanced information on how to kill a bigger bear. So sure. Starting on that topic, first of all, let's just talk about what is a big bear. And obviously this is somewhat dependent upon where you're hunting, but what are those things that you're looking for, Russ, as you're field judging bears in a hunting situation?
Well, probably the biggest factor is if your jaw drops, it's probably a big bear, right?
That's always a good sign, right?
Yeah. Big bears just, it's just really obvious, they have such a lumber and I know it's difficult, especially with new hunters. The first bear that comes in, they come in solo. There's no comparison. Even with multiple bears and even multiple years, you can sometimes get fooled. Obviously, like anything with time, you become familiar with an animal. It's like guys that are mule deer freaks can take a glance on the mountain and know just by the body structure, whether the horns are there or not in the bushes, they know that's a buck, right? So bears are very similar. A lot of guys talk about ears on the side of their head, small ears, big bellies dragging to the ground. That's really not always the case. Kind of the fact is, in Idaho, what I've seen is the longer bears, big bears, will tend to have a longer head and a bigger head if you're worried about score. Obviously, sign, you're talking about tracks. When you talk about a realistic 5-inch measurement pad on the front pad, the width, you get in that 5-inch mark, you're talking about a good Idaho bear, and really a good bear anywhere. You start going over that, pushing 6, then you're kind of talking typically about a monster bear. Scat is obviously a great sign. And I'm kind of talking about when you're slipping in, maybe checking your bait, or just scouting a canyon early spring, trying to find some bear sign to decide whether you want to hunt there or not. The big early spring, it's going to be that dark bear poop, but it's always going to be smaller as they change their diet off the grasses a little bit. It'll get to be bigger, but you see a big bear poop, you know it, right?
Mm-hmm. So big bear poop does equal big bear.
Yeah.
So yeah, in terms of seeing sign, you got that, and then you mentioned the track width. And to be clear, you said that was just up at the front, right? Like kind of the widest section there.
Yeah. The bears have a big pad.
Yeah.
So if you measured parallel with the toes, back against the pad, 5 inches is a good bear. If you got a good, without it sliding, if it's a really realistic print and you've got 5 inches there, that's going to be a good boar.
Yeah. I've heard guys talk about just kind of the movement style of a big bear. Have you seen that in play where a big bear is kind of slower, more methodical, lazy?
That's what I mentioned right at the first there when I referenced a lumber.
Okay.
It's almost seems like it's demanding for them to walk. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. In the sense of it's almost not difficult, but they just have a lot slower approach in their movement, it seems, and their body lumbers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Versus a smaller bear, they can just sort of, scoot along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's really interesting. So when it comes down to it, I guess as we just go ahead and get into methods, there's, obviously bait sites, stalking, you could be doing some calling as well. In your opinion, what's the best way to kill a big bear in terms of those different high-level methods?
Probably, a baiting's going to be the best for sure, in my opinion. Depending on, especially with a bow, right. A rifle may be a little bit different story. Then it comes down to your time in the field. And of course the area you're in, we've got some great, draw hunts here, 22, 32, some of those, you could really find some giant bears in that country. But as a whole on, general season hunt, a bait's going to be, the best way to determine whether it's a big bear or not. So many guys get up hiking and they see a bear and they launch a bullet across a canyon. They get over there and it's, 100 pounds and they thought it was a, good bear. So up close and personal on bait, not only do you get to see them, hopefully you see the sign, but it's, that's still very difficult.
Right.
I know guys that have hunted a long, long time and they've maybe got, 1 or 2 big bears. And there's a lot of things that go into it, obviously, as we'll probably continue to talk about, to consistently get those big ones. A really good technique is a bait, but you set it up as a spot and stalk, because that big bear is going to his location to see if you're there, and if you're not there because you're not there, so then he commits to the bait. You have everything prepared to move in on him. That's a very very productive way to get a big bear. Yep.
Okay. So you're basically saying have a bait site, but instead of being 20 yards away up a tree, you're going to be at a further distance where you can maybe glass that bear, see him from naked eye, wait till he's sort of committed, and then you move in on him as he's distracted and feeding, basically.
And all those things, everything comes into play as far as the setup, the wind. You got to do your homework on that to make everything perfect. In my brain, it's like there's baits I won't even go to until I know the wind's perfect. So I'll be up there waiting for an evening hunt, and there's been times where, guess what? I can't go because the wind's not right, and I'll sit there till 8 o'clock, and then I'll sneak in, right? Mm-hmm. Versus being in a tree and the wind's going crazy, that big bear's just not going to come rolling in because he knows you're there. So that's a really important factor.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
Mm-hmm.
So let's dissect this topic of baiting a bit. I guess let's start a little bit at the beginning. What do you look for when you are selecting a bait site to set up?
Well, the first thing that I look for now is just getting remote, right? I started baiting in the 80s, and I was a guy that was gung-ho. And back at that time, I didn't know what I was doing. So I would I'd find these locations and I'd be up there. And at the end of the day, I was going up there, every 3 or 4 days because the bait was gone and I had to restock it. And then I'm coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And that just became very, wasn't very cost effective. I was training the bear. I mean, the bears had me trained, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was in country that those big bears had been hitting baits since they were, a cub, and they didn't get that big because they walked into a bait when somebody was there and got, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure.
So when I say remote, that's what I look for. And honestly, there's a lot of country that has a lot of bears in it. And if you're content just going and having a good time and seeing bears and shooting a bear, there's a lot of places you can do that without, a lot of people kind of have it's definitely not like a lot of people think, throw some donuts out and you're going to kill a bear. But the reality is if you have a decent setup, there's going to be bears coming in. A bear's going to come in at daylight. It's probably going to be a younger bear and you can shoot a bear, and that's great. But if you want to hunt big bears, there's a big learning curve. Now at any time, a big, thumper can come rolling in anywhere, right? Especially as you get closer to June in the rut, they like any male, they get dumb when they start smelling that. But anyway, now I lost my train of thought here.
No,
I told you
good.
I ramble.
Yeah.
So,
I was just basically saying for the bigger bears, the setup is everything. When I look for a spot, I say remote. It's so much more conducive to drive an extra, 2 or 3 hours, in my opinion, to have the right setup.
Yeah. So when let's say you have an area defined that's remote, that you're going to drive out to, in terms of being more specific on the spot, what are you looking for? I mean, you looking at, distance to water, certain terrain features, wind patterns, like kind of the specifics on picking a spot then within that area to set up that bait site.
Right. Well, I typically prefer a bottom of a canyon versus a top of a canyon, versus on a ridge line. I prefer to be down in the bottom. As we all know, thermals tend to cool or lower down by the, closer to the bottom. And they stay in a down canyon direction longer in the mornings, because I hunt mornings too. And I think mornings can be really conducive for big bears. So I prefer a bottom of a canyon. If I can, I kind of prefer a western slope. It'll tend to stay a little bit lighter longer. But it's more about finding an area, knowing what the thermals are doing, and being more in the bottoms versus on top. The tops, the winds are just always, crazier.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. You said western slope. In my head, I always pictured kind of a canyon running east and west, and I'm it's draining east, wanting the sun to set sooner, so the thermals were really consistent sooner. But you mentioned being light later.
Well, it all depends. I don't think that's really key. I think when you talk about light, I don't necessarily want to be in a dark hole. That's kind of my point.
Okay.
Because typically, especially in baited country, if you're hunting in country where bears are baited, those big bears are typically going to come in right at dark, right?
Yeah, as late as possible, yeah.
Yep.
So do you pay attention obviously keeping the wind in mind, keeping the thermals in mind, obviously you want to make sure you have good access, entry and exit to that site then as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's why I tend to like the bottoms of the canyons. It's predictable when you talk about wind. And I'm just kind of slowly working up that canyon, checking the winds. And once they're committed and good, and I might hang out, 300 yards away from the bait, but once it's committed, then I'll move in. Now, for just a bear, that's really not necessarily that important, because you can get away with more, with smaller bears, with less educated bears. Talking about big age class bears, they're really smart, and if you're not there, you're not there, and they'll move in, And not that I haven't taken big bears, back in the day when I was not doing things the way I do them now, but it was always a lot more time, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I really haven't had that kind of time to commit over the last number of years. It's kind of just weekend warrior stuff, and I've kind of changed things up once Jess started hunting, because some of the kind of extreme stuff I was doing, it's just wouldn't be really conducive now with Jess.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, on our first podcast, you mentioned like literally sitting in a tree stand for 24 hours.
Yeah. I've done that a few times, sat all nighters just to try to see that big bear in the morning. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
And you don't think Jess will go for that?
I used to be pretty gung ho. In fact, I baited from the latter '80s to I think 2006, and at some point I kind of, not that I didn't want to hunt them, but I was just kind of questioning, what do I need more bear hides for? Kind of that scenario, you kind of go through. And I was just doing more spot and stock stuff and doing more hiking. But anyway, once Jess was of age, I was, gung ho right back into it. But that last year, for example, a little bit, the spot I was baiting was literally, it was, 4 trucks, my 12-yard dump trailer full of 4-wheelers, a trailer full of horses. We'd go up over 4,900 pounds of bread and donuts. We'd spend all night on a closed road shuttling these trash bags of donuts and bread about 6.5 miles, I think it was. About daylight, we're getting on the horses and riding the horses in. And then from there, on either side of the big drainage, we're going anywhere from 1.5 miles, maybe 2 miles up each side. So it's a 3-day,
Goodness.
it's solid 3 days of working your tail off. And these, I can't remember the elevation swing. It could have been as much as, 800, 800 to 1,000. So, it's, and I knew no one was going to be there. And it kind of stems back to about, 5 or 6 years into my baiting. I was getting more and more remote, and I was having much more success. And one time I had a friend that I really wanted to get him a bear, and we took him up there and we saw 6 bears the first night. And that's another topic about when you talk about the first sit is just very, very important, and you want to make sure you do everything right. But we saw 6 bears. So I kept telling him, don't shoot. Well, the next morning, I said, okay, there's a couple of those bears I think you should shoot. And he could have shot any, there was a couple nice ones. So we work our way back up in there that morning. Anyway, a couple miles off, I heard hounds. Well, within about 45 minutes, a hound was eating my bait, and they had chased the bear by. We sat that night and saw one bear that it looked like the dogs caught. It had a really messed up, looked like a broken foot, and this bear come in, and I was like, no, don't shoot that one. And I felt bad for it. So from that point on, I said, I will never, ever, and nothing against hound hunting, but I will never have a bait where a hound hunter is going to go, ever. So that just pushed me that much more remote. So I really look at that too.
Yeah.
In this area, the last thing you want is, someone running off of your effort, whether it's intentional or not,
Yeah.
Anyway, talking about extreme. That's how kind of extreme I was when it came to really getting after it. And I was baiting bears that aren't baited, and that's why I could get, big pope and young bears. Not that they come just strolling in. I mean, they're very, very keen, but the first couple setups are key. If you blow that big bear out of there, you're probably not going to see him unless he gets dumb on a sow and the sow brings him in. That's, then you're talking about end of May, into June.
Mm-hmm.
But
so what are some of those things that you can do right or do wrong on those, those first sits? I mean, obviously you think of the common things like being winded, but what else do you need to pay careful attention that you do right or don't do at all?
Well, I think as a whole, starting from your setup, when I mentioned earlier, I was talking about how much time I would spend going up there and baiting because the bears were eating the bait out, right? So I always feel like I needed to keep it replenished. And a lot of guys are doing that. A lot of guys probably still do that, where they go up every 4 days or whatever, and they want to do it. Well, I totally got away from that whole thing. And when I said I took 4,900 pounds of bread and donuts, I know it was because I weighed every bag for the horses, right? Just to keep them even, so I know how much weight I have. But my point is, my goal on a bait setup is a ton. It's 2,000 pounds. Before I set that 2,000 pounds, I'm the guy that walks around, if I'm on a new setup for, half a day to find that perfect spot. I imagine every entrance a bear's going to come, and a lot of it's based on just my experience. And once I finally locate that spot, then that's set up. I set up that tree to where nothing in my brain is going to go wrong, whether it, scraping the bark off the back of the tree, scraping the bark as I'm climbing the tree, building a trail into it. So it's quiet, so I can sneak in, because quite often if you're set up to sneak in at any time, especially on an unbaited area, big bears come in early. Unbaited big bears come in early. So, you want the ability to sneak in and all that. So I have all that completely set up before I drop that ton of bait. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So once that's done, covered, sealed, and then I'm out of there. And I know I typically on a new bait, it's 9 to 11 days, maybe 2 weeks on a new bait. So in that 2-week period, you just got to be patient and watch the weather and make sure, hopefully there's not any, storms pushing in, or I just try to align all the stars to make it perfect, right? And if I get there and the wind's not right, I just have to be patient and wait.
So you're saying you have a window of that 9 or so days once you drop that bait? Is that what you're getting at? You go in, you do the prep, you're going to drop that ton.
New area might be as many as 14 days.
Okay.
My established baits, it would be at least 9 days typically.
Yeah. So you're waiting 9 to 14 days before you even go back and start hunting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so many guys want to, run up and check it, and I get that, but it's not productive. No matter what, you're leaving scent there, period. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I never want to go back there. And trail cameras. A lot of guys want to go check their cameras, see what's coming in. I've never actually owned a trail camera in my life because I don't want to be there. I don't ever want to go to that bait again. And that's one thing I'll say too, coming in from the bottom. If you're talking about thermals, your bait's going to be upstream from you. You're going to be set up downstream. I don't ever want to go by that bait, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just don't ever want to leave any scent. And the whole, 14-day thing is obviously you're letting more bears come in, but not even necessarily more bears. Typically, if a big bear finds it, he's going to hoard it. He's going to run off other bears, and he's going to be close to that bait, right? Really close, especially right at the beginning. And you could easily just bump them off when I'm talking about going in and checking cameras or going in and messing around before you hunt. But, you just want the approach. You want everything just set up perfectly.
Have you ever bumped a big bear or almost got a shot opportunity in like a cagey old mule deer? Would he just disappear and go nocturnal on you, or would he eventually catch back up with them? Or you got one chance at that big Bruin?
Typically. Now, if you get into a really remote area and that bears literally, by chance never even been on a bait, obviously they're not going to be as wise to it, but they wise up really quick. Absolutely. If you're in a, more of a baited area and you bump that big one, like I was saying earlier, yeah. With my experience, they definitely, like I was saying, they don't want to, they'll come back with a sow if a sow's in heat and they're on it,
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And quite often those big bears, they're definitely coming around, and those big bears have their little spots. I kind of tend to like to bait in a little more open stuff where I can see. And, forever, I'll get a handle on where those big bears are, or maybe I'll get a glimpse of them or something, and I'll often see them come to those little spots, and they'll sit there and just put their nose in the air. They'll sit there for, however long, and all of a sudden they just walk off because they smelt you. Mm-hmm. Last year was a good example. I put a satellite stand out, which is a great way to shoot a big bear once you kind of know what they're doing. And I watched this bear come down. I was about 300 yards from the bait. I watched this bear come down off this open ridge, and I picked the right tree to sit in, and it came just right underneath me 15 yards. And I watched its demeanor, its face, and it was just like, it's just chug-a-lugging, no worries in the world, literally like trotting, jumping. This is well before dark, and it had like 3 spots that it would go and sit. And it got to the first rock and it sat there for a while. It's like, I don't smell him yet. Worked down the hill, and I had somebody in the blind on the bait. Worked down to the next spot, went all the way down to the bottom. Again, she was probably about 200 yards from the bait at that time. And she just all of a sudden got kind of, her ears perked up, and she's like, they're there. She just came trotting up the hill, trotted right back underneath me, and was gone. Back the way she came. So that stuff happens probably every night, right? Yeah. You're up there thinking, gosh, there's no bears. Well, yeah, there is, because they know you're there, right? You go to a bait site, and it's just tore to pieces. Your tree stand's ripped. There's poop on your tree stand. The trees are torn apart. You sit in a tree stand all day for 2 days, and you don't see a bear or a glimpse, and you're like, what happened? Well, they know you're there, right? Mm-hmm. Your setup's not right. That's another thing too. I think a lot of people get stuck on their one setup. They go to the same place year after year after year after year, and they'll shoot bears, but they'll very randomly shoot a big bear. It's because they know. Now, as you get closer to the rut, all of a sudden you'll have a boar come from wherever and work its way in, and folks will get a shot at it. But you just got to be adaptive and creative and very careful if you want to try to get big bears year after year.
Yeah.
So constantly changing your bait site, even if it's moving at a couple hundred yards or something?
Yeah, well, I don't again, that kind of depends. I would, it depends on, you're going to see, you'll see things evolve, right? Mm-hmm. So I'll get to a point where I'll think, I'm going to try a little bit different setup. Like last year I did a different setup. No, it was the year before. So I hunted that new setup. I moved the bait actually further down the canyon, so I don't have to take it as far, and it actually worked really well for the last 2 seasons. We shot a few bears there, and I got that big old one-eye that I hadn't seen for 3 years. Last year, he finally came in the last night right at dark, and that was my stock bait. But for whatever reason, he was coming in late, which wasn't allowing me enough time. So I did decide to hang a tree stand. And this is after a lot of time knowing kind of what the thermals were doing. So I waited for the thermals to be just right. And it was literally only about 20 minutes of shooting light left. So I went ahead and snuck all the way in there and did get up in the tree. And he came in right at the, last light.
Wow.
So you just got to kind of be creative, You can't just get stuck in the same groove of the same thing if you want to shoot big bears, in my opinion. If you just want to shoot bears and you're happy with that, great. I mean, there's a lot of guys that are bear hunted every year forever, and that's kind of their thing, and they're happy with that. But still, it's difficult to get, 18-inch bear in Idaho. That's a good bear, right?
Yeah.
A 6-foot bear in Idaho consistently. That's a good one.
Yeah.
So I know you mentioned the bread and donuts earlier. Anything else that you tend to use for a bait site? I mean, I know some guys, they like have some supposedly recipe that's, crack to a bear, and then other guys just, take whatever they can get their hands on. What do you prefer?
I prefer bread, bread and donuts. I guess for a few reasons, it's easy to pack, right?
Mm-hmm.
Grease is great. I mean, if you can get 100 gallons of grease up there, or you don't have to do that much, but get a good grease pad, that's obviously going to help attract other bears when the other bears are tracking it around. I'm a firm believer in that, but typically how I've been doing it with horses and really remote, it's just a mess to me. So
Yeah.
I don't care. And the truth is, I don't really want a lot of bears on my bait. I just want a few, and I want a couple good ones, right?
Yeah.
But
So
go ahead.
I was gonna say the thought with the grease pad is they just step in that grease and go track it a couple miles. Another bear cuts the track, follows it back to the bait site.
Yep.
Yep.
But obviously sweets are good. If you can't, there were years, and it always kind of changes with what I have access to, and it's actually getting tougher. There's more competition. There's lots of pig farmers in April. Or you bear hunters saying they're pig farmers, to get bread. But if I don't have a lot of sweets, I think sweets is very important. I'll get bags of flowered sugar and really cover the bread with that. And it I'm sure it acts like somewhat of a preservative too,
Yeah.
as far as molding out and things like that. But really, I mean, for another really important thing, obviously, is your attractant or your stink. What I've done for years and years is pretty much I'll have 4 or 5 buckets. I'll have, scrap, fish, rock chucks, whatever. I mean, whatever's going to create a stink. I'll bag it very good, say in like an old pillowcase, something that's, not like a burlap sack or something that'll rot, but a good bag. I'll fill that up, dump a little water in it. I'll tie it off with a little lanyard, leave about a 9-inch piece of rope there with a loop on it, and I'll bucket that and I'll bury it, and I'll have that buried for a year. So a year-old stink, every spring you dig it up, you replace it as soon as you can, go shoot carp, do whatever, fill it up and bury it again. I think that's really vital. What I have found is those stink bags, even if they're frozen, it's because it's, things freeze up.
Sure.
And you're not letting out as much stink. So on top of that, what I do is I got a trash bag. So I'll cut like a triangle off the corner of the trash bag. I'll poke a hole in the corner. I'll slide that piece of rope through it. So basically I have kind of a hood, not only a hood so it doesn't get rained out, but a black bag so it attracts heat and heats up that stink.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So and then to go to all that effort. So in other words, when I get there, I know very quickly, once I have my location, I've got a rock thrown up over a limb. It comes down. Okay, everybody stand back.
Yeah.
Pop that lid and tie it on as quick as you can, and pull that up into the air. Bears are amazingly creative in getting stink bags down. So quite often I've lost stink bags. So I've learned, what do I need to do so the suckers can't steal my stink bag? Because that's huge. That's very important, especially when those big boars start roaming. So typically what I'll do is I'm climbing trees and I'm taking rope across, from tree to tree. And then the center of that rope is what I'm pulling it up on.
Right.
So a bear's going to have to go up there, climb up, get on that parachute cord, shimmy out that parachute.
Yeah.
They're going to fall off. And in reality, I like that because they all do. They see.
They're dumb enough to try.
They try it, and to me, it's like good. They're shaking it up. They're shaking that stink up, right?
Wow.
Splatter and stuff, and doing whatever. But that's really, really important. Is do everything in your power to know that a little bear can't climb up and get your stink bag out, because if you just hang it off a limb or whatever, it's going to be gone. And once your stink's gone, you really neutralize your attractant, right? Because obviously bread and donuts and a lot of those things don't have the odor. Now I like vanilla. It's not sticky. So I literally have a spray, like a pump sprayer, like a weed sprayer. So before I set my bait, it's actually right after I set my bait, and I'll have different attractants. I'll literally have a pump sprayer, and I will douche that whole area. So there's a ton of scent. When I walk out of there, it's really blasting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you have that stink bag there, obviously. Hopefully through season. I usually like to get 2 stink bags. I'll usually run one up further up the canyon. Thermals are different in different canyons, so you try your best to figure that out. But so 2 stink bags a year old, that's a pretty good key.
Wow.
I think one nice side note here is, a lot of people maybe turn their nose up at baiting of thinking that's easy, and you really it's a lot of freaking work. We've probably all killed elk a lot easier where you hiked out on opening morning and bugled and something come running in. Bear, it's a lot of prep, getting that bait ready, getting it up there, finding a site, doing it right, packing everything in, and it's just a lot of work. It is a lot of near as easy as a lot of people want to pretend it to be.
No.
Yeah.
And like I kind of touched on earlier, I mean, you can run a pretty ragtag bait and you could get a bear. I mean, I've been right at Lucky Peak Tower years ago. Buddy of mine had a 600-pound pig that died. We drove it up there in my Toyota, drug it down a dead dog there, built a wood tree stand, and we had bears come in that we could have shot. They were small bears, but that was, took us 20 minutes to get there or whatever. So, it can be somewhat easy in that sense, but to really do it right and learn a lot and figure out how to get good bears, it's quite a process. Yeah. And I mean, before just collecting bait alone.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking, just acquiring all the resources to do this, much less doing the work.
Yep. Yeah. You so much of it now you have to buy. I mean, these guys are paying 25 cents a pound.
Wow.
So that adds up, fairly quickly.
Especially if you want to set a ton.
So $500 if you want a ton of bait.
Yeah.
Wow.
Some ways you can look at it like, geez, I want that extra money, because by the time you figure all the evenings running and getting, 100 pounds of bread here, 20 pounds of this or that. I mean, when I started, I was the dumpster diving king. I was at pizza parlors, and I was getting anything and everything I could, until I started learning a little bit more about other options. But it's a process.
Yeah,
it's funny. Some of your stories parallel mine of me trying to learn to bait, because I just the not putting out enough bait, and I picked this one area that I could take a 4-wheeler to for my first bait and packed it like 200 yards from there, and I thought that was hard work, and get stuck every 3-4 days having to do the freaking 2-hour drive, go up there, check the bait, rebait it, and then the year after I'm like, all right, I didn't learn the lesson that I needed to pack more bait, but I had another guy put a bait like 400 yards from mine that first year, and so the year after I was like, oh, I'm gonna freaking find some really remote spot. So I pick a spot that's 3-hour drive, take a motorcycle trail that's just this terrible freaking trail, and ride it in like 3-4 miles. And then I had to do that like every freaking 3rd, 4th night, go back there, and you can only pack 100 pounds on the back of that bike at a time. And it's just funny listening to you talk about it, because it just brings me back to hauling bait. And I remember had a grease bucket on the front of the motorcycle and a grease on the back, and then I rolled the sucker down the thing and grease all over the freaking place, like spread all over my bike, and that was an interesting moment.
Yeah. Before I utilized horses for years and years, of course, with most of my hunting, I utilized big wheels a lot, and that's how I, before, when I was talking earlier about that remote area at the end of the road, before I was just literally had my big wheel. And I'm taking, 8-mile round trips, taking whatever I could and overloading it. And I'm talking, gnarly motorcycle trails, and broke my foot one time. And I mean, yeah. But, the thing about it is, though, you look at all the technology and information, and really what we're talking about now, there's something to be said about learning how to do it on your own and learning the hard way. Because really, at the end of the day, as hunters, I think you're going to appreciate it more, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Those hard knocks and all that. Looking back, it's funny. I mean, when I started, there was like, go rent, Dwight Shoe video. There you go. Have fun. But trial and error with anything, But some of those things, for as far as big bears, there's just things you got to do, and you got to be careful, and they can't know you're there.
Yeah.
Whatever it takes to do that. And there's places, where depending on just the total setup, ideally I like to try to find areas where it's difficult for bears to circle you, right? Whether it's a natural barrier or a cliffy area or, something.
I want to cut you off there because I always pick a bait site, and I'm actually really looking for thick. I try to put like open country behind me and thick country in front of me with bears, thinking they're going to want to stay in that thick cover to approach the bait site. And you said earlier that you pick up more open country, and that kind of surprised me.
Yeah. Yep. If you saw like the baits I've been hunting the last couple of years, you'd be like, really?
Really?
Yeah. I want to be able to see them. I want to see what they're doing, especially the big ones, because I'm all about satellite stands. Find that big bear, and he has his spot where he comes to check, and play the wind and throw a satellite stand up at noon one day. Sneak in that the next time you come up. Usually when I set a stand, I just leave. Right. I'll do that before. I won't try to set a stand and hunt it typically. I'll just set it for the following week or whatever. But yeah, I prefer the more open, and I haven't seen any disadvantage to it. Only an advantage to me, because I want to see them. Yeah.
So are you trying to find a spot still that's on the edge of thicker cover? You're still just in a truly more open area.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're not going to pick a canyon that's burned out.
Right.
You're going to want to have, good timber and cover and, in the area. I mean, yeah, absolutely. And where I set my baits, I'm going to be in some timber.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Interesting.
But very open. The stuff I'm hunting now is really open. In fact, one of the spots is an old burn. Above me is just sort of scattered timber. I mean, these trees might be, 30 yards apart or more, and old growth. But I haven't really seen a difference in the demeanor of bears. And the fact is, there's usually a lot of ground cover. There's bushes and things like that. So I'm not talking just bare dirt. I think if they're even in those, smaller willows and, just cover, I haven't seen them act uncomfortable per se.
That's good. So covered quite a bit and some really good info on baiting. Let's transition to the other methods. I'd like to talk a little bit more, if we can, about that idea of a stock bait. We've touched on it, but kind of give us a play-by-play of scenarios that have worked out really well for you with that situation.
Well, I guess.
Or when do you attempt that versus a typical bait? Maybe a better way to approach it.
Well, that would just be a decision, based on the canyon, I guess.
Okay. But it's not like under certain conditions or things like that?
No, I don't think it's under certain conditions. I think it's good to kind of mix it up a little bit. I always like to have at least two baits, especially if you travel all that way and you're going up there with your friend or your kid or whatever. You shoot a bear off one bait, chances are you kind of spoiled it for the following night. I like to get out of there as quick as possible, and then you can hunt a fresh bait, right? So I like a couple. And I'm not saying you necessarily have to do a spot and stalk, but you might go up into a canyon. And I think it's important just to have it on your front of your brain, because you might look at it and say, gosh, that ridge or way this comes down, or the topography, that would allow me to have a really good stock bait. And really, you don't have to have anything. I like to have, like I said, I like to have my baits lower in the bottom, kind of fairly close to a ridge line. Like when I go to my stock bait, I'm on the backside of this finger ridge the whole way up. So when I sneak over, I'm like 100. My first spot is about 200 yards from the bait where I can glass it, right? So I know if there's a bear in it, I can back off, work my way up that ridge line. So I like to be above the bait on a stock situation so you can see that much better, right? And then once they commit, you can go down. And what I said earlier is the preparation is just absolutely key on your approach, the thermals, the setup. So I will literally, you could take a hoe or a rake or whatever and literally just clear a 16-inch soft dirt trail to where to 30 yards or 25 yards or whatever you want to do. And when you're building it, obviously you're figuring cover and still being able to see and being able to work in on them while they're on the bait, and obviously quietly, they can hear so well. So that would just be a technique. I absolutely think is worth a try for anybody.
Yeah.
Yep. I wouldn't say I definitely don't always do that, but I kind of like to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah.
And last year, like I said, to kill that big bear I ended up hanging a stand on that one for the first time the week before. So I knew I was going to sneak down there the last 20 minutes.
Yeah. So for guys who don't bait, haven't baited, don't have a spot, still want to kill a bear, again, maybe it's not a giant at this point, but let's talk about some of the other methods to not do with bait. Especially as, the season is early, things start to green. Is it really just a matter of trying to identify good food sources is a good place to start to try and find active bears if you're not using a bait?
Yeah. Well, it all depends on the spring, and I think to touch a little bit of another important factor to consider when you're talking about, especially guys that are newer, when you're talking about baiting, and it's going to be relative. I just had this conversation earlier with a friend of mine that drew 22, is it's easy to get really gung-ho and excited, and you load your truck up with everything under the sun and all your bait and your stink and the whole 9 yards, and you drive up there and you spend hours because you can't get 10 miles from the spot you were going to go because there's a 2-foot drift, right? So you spend so much time and energy, because trust me, I've been there, digging your truck out of the snow, taking the bait back home. It's really easy to get excited and then try to do that. And in a lot of cases, guys will just sort of settle, right? Gosh, this is good enough. So they put all their energy into that. It's in lower country that they should be. Hound hunters are running over the top of them, and, there's other baiters by them. So I think it's important to be patient, right? My opinion, there's always a time frame, and it depends on the spring when things just really click. In most cases, you have a bait. Obviously, if it's super established, you'll have bears hit it pretty quick, but especially a newer bait, it's going to be kind of slower. Those bears have come out of hibernation. They're hanging by their dens, depending on the spring. They're staying close. They're eating whatever. Their stomachs are adapting. And all of a sudden they kind of get, ready to roam, and then they're covering country. And then pretty soon it's May and the boars are roaming for sows. So being patient is important. You're much better off, and it depends on, of course, when your unit closes. Some of them are getting more extended now, but my advice is really in most cases, to wait till the end of April.
Okay.
Yeah. And the same thing with the spot and stock. There's just always kind of a time frame where all of a sudden you go up there, and this is kind of, based on history, based on spot and stock hunts I've done, there's just kind of a time frame where all of a sudden you just go up there and you see 6 bears, where the last, 3 hunts you saw 3, right? So being patient, waiting until the end of April into May, I think is important.
Yeah. So you've mentioned hounds. I'm not even familiar, especially with Idaho. Is that the same time frame as the general bear season in most areas?
Yep.
Okay. So them being pressured doesn't really affect your advice to maybe wait a little bit later then?
The what being pressured?
Well, just the bears being pressured. By
you're
hounds.
saying as far as getting your bait out early before hound hunters or hounds are running around?
Yeah.
Well, I think back to what I was saying, if you decide to settle in lower country just to get your bait out because you can't get to the spot you want.
So it's a matter of location, not timing, more so.
Yeah, but on the timing thing, in regards to hound hunters, a lot of those guys are going to be going out early as soon as it opens, just running the lower country. And if you're down there low, easy access, there's a good chance you're going to have, you're going to have hounds on your bait earlier than you wanted them. And then, then they know your bait's there if they're that type of a hound hunter and they're running off of it. And even if, I don't want to downgrade hound hunters at all, but if they're getting into a lot of bears in a certain canyon, whether they know your bait's there or not, they're going to keep coming back to that.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes back to the remote thing.
Right.
But again, there's a lot of places you can go and set up a bait and still have hound hunters around and have a bear come in and shoot it,
Yeah.
So you don't have to go remote if it's not important for you, talking about big bears versus a bear.
Right. Have you ever done any calling, Russ?
I haven't. No.
Yeah.
I've had a few buddies that have tried it and had some luck. It's kind of like rattling whitetails, but I don't even know if it's that consistent. It's just you got to hit them at the right time, like anything,
Yeah.
the right moment.
Yeah.
The right mentality.
Yeah,
I've heard about it a lot, though.
Yeah.
Doing it.
Exactly.
Seems like more so in the fall.
Right.
That I've talked with guys that have had success calling bears.
Yeah, I've tried it in the past and you could see a bear 300 yards away and it just maybe look at you and walked away. I never had one run straight at me. I know that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Not yet. I've done the same thing. I've never had them run at me either.
Yeah.
In most cases, though, I'm like, if I have a tag or whatever, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to try to sneak in on them.
Yeah. So we are getting fairly near time here. Before we get wrapping this up, I'd love to talk a little bit about not preparing to hunt, but the actual hunt, the actual shot itself. Any specific tips, Russ, on either bow setup or just shooting tips in general for guys who are, maybe used to hunting elk and deer more than bear? How should they be considering adapting their setup if necessary, or just things to keep in mind in terms of the difference in animal behavior, when to shoot, where to shoot, things like that?
Right. Well, I guess a little bit in reference, I touched on it earlier, is just being overly anal about any unnatural sound. Bears have amazing ears. Quite often, and I can tell by their demeanor, but a lot of people might not be able to tell by their demeanor that they heard you or heard something. So the sound side of things is super important. Going back to make sure your street stand does not creak. Make sure you've got the bark off of the back. So when you're moving, you're not, catching bark on your back of your coat. Try to make it so you have less movement as possible as far as hanging your bow or using a bow hook and having it right there. The truth is once bears, from my experience, commit, bigger bears are a little bit different. Once they commit, they come in and they've kind of decided they're pretty content, right? Especially the smaller bears, they'll just be running around sometimes. But even the bigger bears, once they decide it's safe, sometimes they'll just come lumbering in without a care in the world. But your tree stand creaks, or you make a sound, even if your bow, like super quiet night, if you don't have good, fleece or a quiet rest, just on the draw, they'll hear it and just explode out of there. So that's obviously key really in any hunting situation. Again, on this setup, your approach is quiet. Make sure it's quiet. Climbing the trees quiet. Just you want to be as quiet as possible on unnatural sounds. Obviously, when you talk about backdrop, backdrop's pretty important for bears. Not nearly, I don't think, as important as maybe a deer. But I always like to get concealed as possible. Sometimes you can't help it, but I like to get into some limbs and not only concealment, but kind of even have a limb to lean on. I always like a couple big limbs to lean on if I can handle it, or find the right tree to do so. And then when you're building your trough, we didn't really touch on the trough. I think that's super important. You have the ability to pick up trees and whether it's a rock formation or something to build your trough, so those bears have to come in a certain way. So I build basically kind of a V. And I'm a guy that really likes to cover the top of it with, try to get lodgepole stuff, really cover it. So basically it's a cave. And then I try to put pine, boughs and all sorts of stuff to somewhat waterproof it, because I don't like using barrels. So you have the ability to direct where that bear is going to go to give you that shot you're hoping to get. And when you talk about the troughs, they really, really need to be solid, interweaving limbs. Every time a bear's going to try to come in from the backside, and I don't necessarily know why, but quite often they're going to try to dig from the backside. So you could be sitting there for 3 days. That big bear finally comes in. He comes up and he's laying on the backside of the trough, pulling bread out from the backside, and you never get a shot at him, right? So that really needs to be just bulletproof, overly built, stacked, weaved, and then, like I said, covered. I like to cover it. Part of the reason for the cover is once the bait starts getting eaten away, it's kind of up underneath there. I mean, I've gone in there and bears are up underneath of it. I didn't even know they're there. I've walked up 5 yards and had a bear explode out of my little trough, right? So that allows you some forgiveness for movement, for sound, for all those things. So the trough, back to setup, is super important. We didn't really touch on that, but so that's a pretty key thing as well. You can make that bear go to give you the right shot.
Yeah.
So when you're about to shoot one, aim high, aim low, aim middle of the body. Where are you looking?
Well, obviously that's going to depend on the angle of your shot. I like to pretty much be. A lot of people will say that the vitals are kind of low and forward. Everybody kind of has an opinion. I like to stay basically in the crease of the shoulder, if anything, just slightly back. But yeah, obviously, little high as center. Depends on the angle, how high you are, of course.
Okay.
Pretty much center of mass, or just above center of mass. You have to be aware of it. You have to hopefully be able to, like hunting period, obviously a bear comes in for the first time and your brain's going crazy, and you just do your best, like any opportunity of a shot, to clutch up and imagine where the arrow's going to be coming out the other side.
I don't know about you, but every bear
I was just going to say the other thing, just like Jess the other day, he came home from school and I was in here working, and I kind of looked out the back and he's on top of the roof, shooting his compound and his recurve. That makes all the difference in the world.
That's awesome.
You just, and I did it too. I still do it. So it's all about confidence, that's 15 yards away, your bait, and you've shot 400 arrows off your roof the same distance. Really, it's just going to happen naturally, and you're going to know where you're going to hit. Getting a 3D bear target would be great too. Bears are something that it's hard to pick a spot quite often, because they just blend, especially if in the latter part of the evening when it's getting shadowy and it's getting dark. You really want to try to just concentrate on that spot and practicing with a like target. Anything you can do in your brain to anything you can do to simulate any situation is going to be beneficial. And I've always been a big visualizer with sports and racing and whatever I've done. So you play things over in your head in any hunting situation, it kind of goes back, with setup and everything. Some of my buddies I drive them crazy because I'm there for 2 hours trying to pick the perfect tree. I'm like, what are you doing? I want it perfect, But I think those things have proven to
help, to matter.
Pieces of the puzzle,
Yeah.
Anyway, what were we going to say, Steve? Sorry.
Oh, for whatever reason, I've killed, I think, 7 bears now. And after every single one, I get the shakes for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
I have no idea why. I mean, I'm just or more excited if I shoot an elk or something, but with killing a bear, I can't stop shaking. It's the weirdest. That bear I killed with Charlie a couple years ago, we have that on video, and my whole body is just convulsing. I don't know what the excitement is or what goes on, but it's I don't know if you experience the same thing.
No, I know I do.
Yeah,
I do. Big bears to me get me going more than anything. When you talk about that emotion and that, even when I first see them, they still do. And then of course, the shot afterward, it takes over. I think everybody's a little bit different that way. Some people are pretty calm, cool, and collect during the process. Some people are just, after the shot. That's the way Jess is. Jess is a rock on the shot. And then he just, but no, bears do the same thing. And, I think it's an element too of you sit there for so long and you're just trying so hard not, to be as quiet as possible. And you're just always kind of, your emotions are building up, and then you just have that, that adrenaline dump. So no, that's what keeps me going back. But cool. Bears to me, more than anything, the big bears to me just
get you going.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I'm sure I'm still doing it, but yeah, and it's a different beast, when you start getting into those bigger bears. To me, they're just really neat to watch.
Yeah, that's very cool. So, are you planning on getting out with the trad bow for sure this year, Russ, or just kind of playing up here?
Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'm gonna. I haven't decided what exactly I'm gonna do, but I think for bear and antelope, maybe elk. Kind of depends on where I go. I'm thinking about scouting some new country this summer for elk, but yeah, maybe the late season. That's a little bit difficult with the recurve when you talk about bulk and stuff. Kind of had issues with that, but no, I'm excited. That's as cool. Usual. But again, my priority is getting out with Jess, and I don't know. That gets me just as excited.
Yeah, for sure.
Kind of like starting over in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I could imagine.
He's really. I'm starting to see the fire in him, which has been great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yep.
So I'm sure we covered this on the last episode, but for guys who didn't catch it, for guys who don't already get a chance to follow your stuff, what's the best way to kind of stay up to date and see how your season unfolds and all that?
Yeah, well, I have an Instagram, Meyer Archery. I'm co-owner of a company, Outdoors International, for guys that don't know. It's gothunts.com. And when you talk about bear hunting, obviously, one of my favorite hunts I went on was in BC. It's a spot and stalk hunt. So, if anybody's ever interested in hunting Canada, go to gothunts.com, look me up. We have a YouTube page and, several hunting videos, and enjoy what we do and work with a lot of folks and outfitters around the world. I still kind of enjoy doing my own thing, but especially with Jess now, but we've got a lot of opportunity. But yeah, I'm on Facebook.
Cool.
I'm learning the Instagram. I got talked into it in October, but it's kind of fun. I've kind of phased out of Facebook because I can't multitask very well, I guess, but the Instagram's pretty fun.
Yeah, there's less drama and all that extra other junk,
Yeah, short and sweet, and it doesn't seem like you get all the extra junk. You get the occasional hate comment, but those are pretty easy to delete and block.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, thanks a bunch for your time, Russ, and good luck this spring.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys.
Thanks for coming on, Russ. We'll see you next week for a hike.
All right, buddy. Take care. Thanks.
All right.
Well, thanks for listening so much, guys. Be sure to check out the show notes, exomountaingear.com/31 for 31. As always, we'd love to hear some feedback. Send us an email to podcast@exomountaingear.com or leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever else you might be listening to this. We'll catch you next time.